Hey, hi, welcome. Welcome to the Safety Meeting. This is episode 10. Want to talk about wellness. I recently did a video about wellness and why it's important in a health and safety program. Going to recap some of that today, but I'd like to also expand a bit on it and maybe go in a little further and talk about what is wellness anyway and what's it look like. So welcome everybody that's joined, and feel free, jump into the chat, which reminds me, let's talk about the chat rules right now. Participation is awesome. It's really nice. I appreciate it. And, oops, they disappeared. There they go. Anyway, please participate. Jump into the chat. You have to be subscribed to chat, but you don't have to be you also have to be subscribed to comment too, or at least have a YouTube account. You can comment without being subscribed to the channel, though I appreciate it. Ask and answer questions. By all means, collaboration is nice. Your knowledge and opinions count. But on that note, please be civil. No name calling, no insults. Discussion is great. However, anything that occurs in the chat, the comments, or even on this video should not necessarily be considered professional advice. I only give professional advice once there's a contract signed and there's money going to change. Now, with the times, such as they are, please, no medical advice, no vaccine shaming, pro or con or otherwise, and also no links or URLs in the chat or comments for promotion. Yeah, great. So, yeah, let's get on with things here. Now, yeah, recent things have occurred. In fact, just bringing up my speaking notes here. Just recently, in case anybody's not sure, COVID is still a thing. In fact, recently, the WHO announced a new variant. What's it called? Oh, yeah, Omicron, their new variant. Oh, my. Yeah, I suspect that mainstream media is going to be signaling the end of days even more so, and blah, blah, blah. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they likely want to have the ability to use the Jaws theme in the background when they're talking about this newest thing. And sorry if I'm sounding just a little flippant, but realistically, I had a look at all of the newscasts when it first came out and a lot of the different info bites and everything. And one of the things I did note is the person that is, what's her name again? Oh, Lord, it escapes my, oh yes, that's right too. Angelique Kutsi, not sure. She's the chair of the South African Medical Association, and she went online and she did a few video presentations, some news bites, sound bites, and one of the things that she said throughout a lot of them is the symptoms are severely mild. In fact, they encompass things like general malaise, fatigue, more so than people usually feel, and headaches and joint pains. And she also went further in a couple of articles and furthermore, a couple of her presentations that she did on camera. And she did say that she felt that the UK is making way more of it than they should. However, let's get back into some serious notes here. It's cold and flu season. It's the traditional cold and flu season. So you know what? If you're not feeling well, if you're showing signs and symptoms of being ill, like headache, nausea, fatigue, sore throat, coughing, stuffed up, all of that other stuff, stay home, stay hydrated, take your medication as directed. If you need to, seek medical aid. But also, too, another thing to note, if you're in the vulnerable sector, it might be a good idea to go get a flu shot. It's very funny. Excuse me. It's very funny that, you know what, the flu shots the how should we say, the promotion of them, the advertisements, and everything seems to have almost disappeared. I don't know if you've seen more. Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. Yeah, so let's talk about a few other things here. Just want to make sure, yeah, music shut off. Oh, I think I got a bit of an echo here. Nobody told me. There we go. The echo shut off. There we go. Let's jump in and talk about a few things in the news. One of them is, and I want to talk about some things. This will focus and kind of pertain and supplement what I want to talk about today. But first off, I want to talk about everybody's favorite retail oligarchy, and that's Amazon. They've recent article, and it came to my attention because I pay a lot of attention to health and safety news feeds. And one of the things that Amazon was doing was starting to do some research into fixing what they do as far as health and safety goes. And they even introduced a well-being program to focus on improving workers' individual resilience through measures like healthy eating and body mechanics. And these are good because they focus on what we're talking about today, which is wellness. Now, unfortunately, when there was some investigative reporting done, there really wasn't a lot of evidence that the Amazon managers really considered decreasing the rate of work as a way to improve worker well-being. Now, what I mean by that is focusing on proper pacing for your work and health monitoring during the work. Because if you're going to institute any kind of these processes and programs, the monitoring of them for their effectiveness has to go a long way. If you're not monitoring it really and truthfully, what's it worth? Because you want to identify what needs to be done, institute the standards, and then monitor them for effectiveness and evaluate that, and then correct any of your actions as you're doing this. If you're not doing it, it's all for naught, because how do you know if it's successful or failing? Now, one of the things to note, the reporters found that their findings paint a possible picture of harmful practices inside Amazon's fulfillment centers, especially during their peak periods, which is, of course, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Prime Day sales, and, of course, Christmas time. And we're coming up to it now. And even the fact is Amazon takes on a lot of part-time and temporary staff during these sessions. The other thing that they found, as they surveyed the workers, 66% of them had said that they had experienced physical pain while performing their regular duties. And they continued experiencing pain while they were not at work. And that's one of the things that wellness programs and well-being programs have to consider. It's not just on the job, but the employee off the job. Pretty important stuff when you get right down to it. And because how the worker is resting when they're away from work is going to have a direct reflection on how they're going to be performing the following day. Now, when they're experiencing musculoskeletal disorders, when you get sore or when you start to ache or when you experience joint pain, it's not as though you can work past it. That old adage of work through the pain doesn't necessarily pertain or even work. Because what happens is musculoskeletal disorders are often cumulative. In other words, they just continue to get worse. Think of driving on a leaking tire. Eventually, you have to stop the vehicle, give it rest, pump it up, in other words, recuperate. So, or change the tire, surgery. Hopefully that's not as drastic as it would come to be. So it's important if you're going to be instituting any kind of a wellness program, continuous monitoring and looking for ways to improve it or assure what you're doing is working. Now, let's talk about the next piece. And that's Saskatchewan. And I know, I'll just bring the headline up. Women are pushing for a change in workplace in Saskatchewan. Now, I know you're thinking suffragettes aren't around anymore and we don't have to worry. Women are allowed in the workforce. But part of the problem is it's sexual harassment that's the issue. And believe it or not, you would think that labor laws all across Canada and all across the Western world, for that matter, would be addressing this. But it's not the case. In fact, there's many women that have been dealing with sexual harassment, and even though there's legislation in place, it still is occurring. Saskatchewan is looking at bringing and tabling it. In fact, last week, the government proposed that they are going to be introducing legislation that'll make it very clear that any unwelcome action of a sexual nature constitutes harassment. Just looking further at the article. If this is passed, Saskatchewan would become one of only 5 provinces to specifically reference sexual harassment legislation. Of course, the others are Alberta, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. Now, it may sound like, what is sexual harassment? What does this legislation have to do with health and safety? Actually, quite a bit. More so than you would think. Because what it does is it affects the mental wellness of the workers who have been the targets of this sexual harassment. Many people think that you can get past it and everything, but a lot of times these things leave lasting impressions. And what happens is that mental health carries home with the worker, affects the worker in their home life, and carries back to work. So once again, looking after a worker's mental health is a win-win. It's good for the worker, and it will increase or maintain a high level of productivity. Now, just another quick thing to note before we move further on to wellness is happen to be just noting a few things through social media, mainstream media, and a few other things. And as I've said before, and I said earlier, I noticed that promotion of flu vaccine clinics and even employers' promotion of it and sponsorship of flu vaccine clinics at the workplace seems to be diminished. And in fact, I think likely what it is, it's overshadowed by the current pandemic and COVID-19. But just a quick reminder of the top 10 pandemics in history, almost half of them were caused by flus. So just a quick thing to note, if you're in the vulnerable sector, if you're a senior citizen or have any kind of immune issues or pre-existing medical conditions, it might be an idea to talk to your doctor about the need for a flu shot. Or if you've got them in the past, maybe you might want to carry it on. I'm likely already preaching to the choir, and most people have already got the flu shots, but yeah, well, just in case, it's a good reminder, especially when we're talking wellness. And on the note of wellness, just a quick reminder too. If you feel like sharing the video, by all means, share the video. Sharing is caring, and I appreciate all of it. Yeah, sharing is caring. I also appreciate any comments I get. By all means, it's the only way that I'm going to be able to understand how I'm doing or what's happening, what's occurring. And like anything else, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you can't subscribe in the chat. Hi, Jim. Good to see you. And sorry about the echo. I only meant it to talk about the Omicron virus, and I forgot to turn it off. Yeah, maybe I won't be using any kind of effects anymore. That's for sure. Yeah. Anyway, I've talked about the preceding articles for a few reasons. Uh, Number one is, you know what? Honestly, health and safety in the workplace has to embody health as well as safety. The two are often thought as separate entities, but really and truthfully, they have to complement each other. Wellness incorporates a number of things, and things that some people take for granted or might ignore as they're not important or essential in a corporate setting. I've heard it time and time again. A lot of people say, well, that's a waste of money. If people don't want to be fit and don't want to be active and don't want to eat properly, that's their business. And truthfully, it is. And we're going to talk more about that in a sec. But the other thing is the way of thinking that wellness is just something that it's an archaic term, and the archaic notion of human resources. A lot of times it's now being referred to as people services or the people department. But you tend to think of things differently. But we in the corporate world, we're anxious to always maintain equipment. We're always anxious to ensure that we're looking out for the end of life of equipment. What if we were to take and put that same attention to maintaining our people? If we value the people, then we need to consider their wellness or their maintenance. I hope it makes sense. I really do. Now, let's get further. Let's get into it. And well, I didn't mean to do that. Let's get into it and let's talk about the obvious question. And a lot of people have that obvious question. They want to know what's wellness. And fair enough. I want to know what's wellness too. Well, I actually know what it is because I've been talking about it. But to be honest, it's more than just a kale smoothie. It's more than trying to force feed your coworkers a cup of something that looks like lawn cuttings and likely tastes like it too. And in fact, for a long time, I thought myself that wellness was just some sort of obscure concern that maybe someone in their semi-retirement age in HR was looking after, or maybe somebody else on some committee somewhere that liked running marathons was paying attention to. I never really understood early on in my career how much it meant to health and safety until I started to become more involved in health and safety. And to be honest and absolutely truthful, it's more than just a stop smoking program. There's a lot more to it. Typical impressions people have is wellness is an exercise program, or just handing out gym passes, or allowing employees or providing the opportunity for employees to have a discount at their local gym. Some people think that wellness is stop smoking programs or a smoking cessation program, as they're called, and handing out pamphlets or leaving a bunch of pamphlets in the coffee room or putting up signs in the smoking area at work. But no, wellness is sort of something that focuses on employee health. It has to be something that focuses on employee health at the workplace and outside of the workplace. As I said, it's more than just suggesting what your coworkers eat, drink, or do whatever with. Believe it or not, the notion of wellness has been around for a long time. In fact, there's some anecdotal history about concerns in wellness even during the time of the building of the pyramids. But because it's anecdotal and not officially recorded, we can't necessarily rely on it. But there are a few historical things. And I'm likely going to mangle this name. But an Italian scientist and social reformer, Bernardini Ramazzini, wrote about the effects of exposure on workers, more looking at the idea of occupational diseases. But he was interested in the possibilities of other preventive measures to improve employee well-being. In other words, he was even one of those people that was looking at the idea of exposure control. In other words, limiting the time that employees or workers at the time were exposed to certain things like smoke in foundries, etc. And so really neat. But other things started to evolve too as well as time went by. And in the early part of the 19th century, a social reformer, a Welsh fellow by the name of Robert Marcus Owen, sort of coined the phrase and adopted and tried to promote the idea of 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, and 8 hours rest. And he did this around, as I said, 1810. Now, the unique thing here is that Henry Ford, who is sort of kind of considered the forerunner or the father of the assembly line idea and mass production, adopted that notion himself in 1914. So even Ford saw the idea of decreasing the amount of time that employees were spending at work, but enough to get the essential work done and ensuring that they had time away from work to recuperate and rest. And it was also noted that in doing so, Ford saw an increase in production. Interesting. And of course, as we moved into the 20th century, that also brought more stuff as well, as far as what wellness is. In the 1950s, there was a lot of innovations as far as a lot of large corporations started to bring in employee assistance programs. A lot of times now they're looked at as EFAPs, which is an Employee Family Assistance Program. And they've evolved beyond what they first started off with, which was consideration for alcoholism and other addictions and mental health issues. But even in the 1950s, there was a note of interest on how much mental health outside of work affected work. Of course, the 1970s started this culture shift that promoted fitness amongst workers, and there was a big move with corporations handing out gym passes and memberships to the local Y, and even some larger corporations and larger conglomerates building on-site gyms. And of course, this also began a lot of serious research taking place about the cost of employees' unhealthy habits. Believe it or not, even going back to that Egyptian pyramid thing, there was anecdotal writing by historians at the time noting that the slaves, which were the Jewish people, at the time, if they weren't being well fed, the production wasn't as good as could be expected. Now, that's the funny thing, because even that realization that if the pharaohs wanted the pyramids built, they had to look after the workers outside of work, or the slaves. Now, the 90s brought along an increase in government involvement. In fact, what was happening is governments were starting to look at this and take into account that they should be providing incentives and grants to employers to fund wellness and start to promote wellness on the job. And you have to look at it. It's a win-win situation. If the government has more workers working, they have more of a tax base. And so it's how should we say, not necessarily always altruistic, but it shows a reason for doing it, and it shows the idea of a return. And employers began also seriously funding wellness programs themselves. The concept started to emerge that employee health is a cornerstone and a value to the organization. And so overall employee worth and value is increased with a concern over their wellness. But it's important. Can you define wellness? Always, too. We have to look at it. When you're going to enter something into a program or begin something, how you define it gives it a sense of being. It brings it into reality. Until you define something within any kind of program, where it's an overall wellness program or wellness is part of your safety program, it's really all for naught. You have to define it. And so wellness has to be, you have to consider that wellness has to target and look at overall employee health at work and outside of work, including disease awareness and possible prevention. The mental health of all workers has to be a consideration, focusing also not only on the physical wellness, but the mental wellness. There has to be a value placed upon physical fitness and mental wellness as foundations for your wellness program. So the definition might sound something like this. Workplace wellness is a program with the intention of creating and fostering a sustainable health and wellness culture that understands and relishes the concept of employee health as a cornerstone of the overall employee worth and value. That kind of encompasses, and go ahead if you want to steal it, I don't care. I just made it up on a whim. It's likely not the best definition. It's certainly not the best policy statement, but it will work. And of course, if you want to adopt some of it and craft it onto your own, by all means, go right ahead. Whoop. I'm having a problem with PowerPoint today. So after that, we have to ask, what's the aim? Like, great, it's great. We have this wellness program defined, and we have to understand, though, when we define it, the initiatives and activities around a corporate wellness program, just like your safety program, can't be a cookie cutter solution. You can adopt and borrow some things from other organizations, but just like your workplace culture, your wellness program has to be unique to your organization. It has to be tailored to your organization. And in a next live stream, I'll talk more about what wellness can do, what it can look like, and what you can include. But wellness, once again, has to be tailored to your workplace. You want to target overall employee health outside of work, including disease awareness and possible prevention. Focus on the mental health and mental wellness of your workers, and of course, set a foundation being physical fitness and mental wellness for your program. So the typical The typical activities, and a lot of people have a lot of ideas what the typical activities might be. And some of the typical ones, of course, are smoking cessation programs, but a big one is disease awareness and the preventive measures. Focusing, of course, on physical fitness and diet promotion, and there's more that goes into it. Honestly, there is. And we'll look at that at a later live stream because it sort of deserves its own. Now, the next thing, as I said earlier, is really and truthfully, wellness belongs in a safety program, but a lot of organizations will approach it a few different ways. They may make it substantially a human resources or an employee services program that will have components or support from the health and safety program, or it may be its own program altogether, separate from both, with contributions from both different departments. Whatever it looks like in your organization is great, but a couple of things that we have to remember is it's valuable no matter what. A lot of people will always question, well, why do I need it? What's the point? I think my camera's out of focus. But what's the point? What's the need? Is there any worth to a wellness program? And by all means, there is. You have to realize that healthy and well employees are going to function better, and they're going to likely be on time for work. In fact, and I don't have the time, and I don't want to take up your time today, but there has been so many studies on punctuality as a reflection of wellness. And you know what? Go ahead, reflect on not necessarily yourselves, but maybe some of your coworkers. And the ones that were on time lots and usually punctual, a lot of them had some commonalities. They had a good mental health and mental wellness outlook. They also likely were at least decently physically fit, and they used a good diet, and chances are they weren't smokers. And honestly, those studies have been done. They're out there. If you want, I can throw a couple of links down in the description. You can just let me know in the comments. But the problem is, a lot of people think that wellness is just focused on by those folks. They shop in the organic food section of their farmer's market, or you find them sitting in some dimly lit coffee house enjoying a narrative reading by some obscure 18th century English poet. But it's not the case. In fact, if you dive deep enough, most of your coworkers and most of the people you work with are concerned about workplace wellness at some level. And the questions, of course, that are always going to get asked is it worth it? Is it worth the time and effort? What's the return on investment? And in fact, unfortunately, the same thing as with any kind of exercise programs or anything else, people expect, really couldn't snap the fingers today. Oh, well. Some sort of return right away. They expect to be able to walk up and look in the mirror and see a difference after 2 days. And that's not the case. It's the same thing. You have to be in kind of the long game, or in for the long game, to appreciate it. So let's look at a few things that actually may convince you a little bit more about the worth. And what I'm going to do is just focus on, and this is a recap of an earlier video I did, but I want to expand a bit upon it. And that's the value of live stream, because I don't have to rush through it like a video. But in Canada here, gotta get a drink. In Canada here, we look at the leading causes of death. And this is from Stats Canada and Canada Health for 2019. And they are cancer, diseases of the heart, chronic lower respiratory diseases, and diabetes mellitus. Now, believe it or not, cerebrovascular diseases have some focus as well with wellness. But these are the top four. They're the big four. They're called the big four. And believe it or not, we can influence these by our health changes. And you know what? A lot of people have this thought, well, it's just Canada. But this is something that's systemic worldwide. In fact, if we look at here in the United States, average life or not here in the United States, but in the United States, average life expectancy is 78.8 years, which has gone up. Like, a lot of people have this doom and gloom idea about the world right now, but believe it or not, we are living in the best time of history. Malnutrition in the Western world is at an all-time low. I'm not talking about developing countries, that's a different situation. But even worldwide, malnutrition is at an all-time low. Mortality from diseases is at much lower than it was 100 years ago. So we're living in a good time, but unfortunately, we're also causing our mortality more so ever than before, because heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory diseases, and diabetes are directly affected by lifestyle. Looking at worldwide, and what I did is I took upper middle income countries so that I could match apples to apples instead of apples to turnips. It's important because we have to understand that developing countries have their own challenges with disease, parasitical invasion, etc. And of course, the hygiene and nutrition that we don't necessarily have as a challenge here in the West. But once again, we see the same thing. Ischemic heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes mellitus, and hypertensive heart disease. All of these are affected by our behavior. They are, absolutely. And just some other things to consider here is that the biggest one is smoking. The biggest issue in the workplace today, as far as health goes, beyond the occupational safety, if we push occupational safety off to the side, not saying we need to do that, but let's not focus on it right now. Let's focus on health. And healthy habits do make the workplace safer. In fact, healthier workers are less likely to suffer chronic soft tissue injuries like tendonitis and ligament injuries, also microtraumas that lead to other traumas such as sprains, strains, fractures, etc. Now, a couple of other things to consider here is, as far as lifestyles go, two things: obesity and smoking. So first, let's talk about obesity. And I'm just going to bring back the Canada one at the moment. Now, we know about the big health risks associated with obesity: cancer, disease of the heart, chronic lower respiratory diseases, and diabetes mellitus. Couple of other things to consider, though, beyond the big four is obesity also contributes to higher incidence of sleep apnea, where you stop breathing overnight in intermittent at intermittent times for short periods of times. And now your brain needs a steady, constant supply of oxygen. But if throughout the night, when you're expected to get rest, you're stopping breathing and then partially waking up to start breathing again, that's going to lead to other problems such as a shorter attention span, other cognitive difficulties, mental tolerance levels go down, and of course contributes to other mental health complications. Obesity itself also is a contributor to mental health complications like depression and anxiety. Now, something else to take note with, and I'm not poking at obese people at all. I'm not trying to make obese people feel guilty or anything else like that. I'm pointing out something that your wellness program could focus on and likely do some good and give you some returns. But employees who are overweight or obese face a higher risk of injury at work. In fact, 1.4 times higher for a back injury. And that's the truth. I used to weigh 220 pounds. I'm down lower than that, but I need to get even lower. But when I was that heavy, I had more back issues than I do now. They're also 1.5 times higher for other musculoskeletal injuries, such as sprains and, of course, fractures, because, of course, they're supporting extra weight their body really isn't designed for. Now, once again, a lot of people paint the stigma of those that are obese as lazy, and I know a lot of people who struggle with their weight and they're not lazy. I know some very industrious people that struggle with their weight. Now, beyond that, the next one is smoking. Now, we know, and in fact, cigarettes, you'll see that they have huge advertisements. I was debating buying a pack just so I could put it on camera, but I'm not going to bother. And I could have downloaded a picture, but they have advertisements right on them about how they lead to a lot of different things. And the main ones: cancer, heart disease, respiratory diseases, emphysema, and of course, they also increase the risk of diabetes. But we have to understand that smokers also have an impact. The smoking has an impact on the musculoskeletal system. It increases the risk of injury. It also reduces healing, and you have poorer healing, and of course, disease. Here's an interesting quote when you think about it. Smokers have a higher risk of fractures and complications after surgery than non-smokers, as well as a decreased physical performance because they experience shortness of breath 3 times more than non-smokers. Believe it or not, smoking weakens the bones, and it's a big contributor to the risk of osteoporosis. Now, when we put that all together, we understand that there's a lot of issues. I'm going to bring up a website really quick from Health Canada, and it just provides us with a few other things that we can use. And if you're creating a wellness program and you want to have some other, how should we say, research or indicators of what you should focus on, your countries, wherever you live, your government websites around health and welfare are going to be a good resource for you, and they'll give you a good springboard to other research. It's okay to use somebody else's work to springboard your research or have it so that you can use it to tailor your own wellness program. But if we look here, we have healthy choices to reduce the risk of the big four diseases, which I've said them enough times, I think you remember them. Non-smoker and avoid secondhand smoke. And so that means smokers, think about what you're doing to your kids. I know lots of people that smoke and they have kids, but they smoke outside their house. So that's an excellent consideration. They, of course, need to also work on quitting smoking. Be physically active. You know what? Even a 20-minute walk per day makes a huge difference. If you, and once again, it happens lots. People buy exercise equipment right after Christmas because they make that New Year's resolution and then it's used to hang laundry on. And I understand, but walking is some of the best exercise you can get. So you know what? It helps. Eat healthy foods, okay? Make healthier choices. My personal opinion, they should take all carbonated soft drinks with sugar in them and change the labels to be just like cigarette labels, where you have a little tiny label for the brand and the big is about the health risks. In fact, I read a study, and I could be wrong, that there's some soft drinks that have to have such an influx of phosphorus in them so they will keep them liquid because they're almost like syrup. And phosphorus weakens bones. So just something to know. Try to get down to a healthier weight. Like I said, I've got to lose at least another 10 pounds, working on it. Not as hard as I should be. Controlling your blood pressure, which helps with both exercise, diet, and of course, non-smoking. Avoid alcohol. Reduce your stress. Mental health makes a big difference. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about it before the end of the live stream, so stick around. And once again, be screened or tested regularly. It's really important that we understand the effects that our lifestyle has on our health. And people will, how should I say, want to make the best choice, but a lot of times they have to be shepherded or guided to that best choice. And so that's why wellness programs at work make a big difference. Because even if it's short presentations or a multifaceted approach where you have literature, presentations, free lunch hour things, activities like, hey, let's take a lunch hour walk, etc., will go a lot, because what happens is it starts a routine, and we as human beings love routines. In fact, how many of you, when there's a break in your routine, don't get upset just a little bit? So if we start a routine and repeat it for at least 21 days, then it becomes almost a human routine, our routine. It becomes a personalized routine. And then stopping that becomes an issue, and it gets to the point you don't want to stop it. So once again, like I said, I'm going to talk about what's wellness look like and how you might go about promoting it in the next episode. But one thing I want to talk about too as well is COVID-19 comorbidities. And if you look, there are the big four: lung disease, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and of course, a big one, you see the arrow pointing at, and that's obesity, having a BMI of 40 or higher. And that's where you're typically obese. So once again, your own personal wellness also can have an effect on how you might deal with COVID-19 should you end up contracting it. And these are things that have shown that these people have had negative outcomes or hospitalization as a result of contracting COVID-19 when these comorbidities have been present. Yeah. So before I head off, how long have we been live streaming? Oh, 40 minutes. That's not bad. I didn't think it was going to be a long one, but before we head off, just a couple of things maybe I should talk about. Just let me have a quick look and see how many people are online. Oh, not a lot of people, but if anybody had any questions they wanted to post into the chat before I head off, by all means, post a question. Just remember that it's just how I might answer something, more possibly my opinion or how I might deal with the safety issue. It shouldn't be considered professional advice until, once again, there's a contract. But no questions? Okay, well, in that case then, let me ask you a couple of questions and leave you with a couple of things to know. What would have happened if even 3 or 4 years ago, if governments and employers had have approached health and wellness as lifestyle changes and promoting lifestyle changes with that same rabid, fanatical enthusiasm that they have with mandated vaccines, and inputted these or implemented these wellness initiatives? What would have happened? Where would we be today? I just wonder. Yeah, go ahead. Let me know in the chats or comments. It's up to you. I don't mind. And it's not that I'm against vaccines. Absolutely not. I've been vaccinated for more things than most people have. However, it's the notion of mandated vaccines. That's where I have a problem. And I prefer prevention because I'm a safety guy. We're all about prevention. We're about finding the issue, finding the root cause, and then preventing future occurrences. And by reducing comorbidities in people, that reduces hospitalization and negative outcomes. Proven fact. The other thing I want to leave you with right now too as well, and I'm going to focus on the next live stream, is 'tis the season for rush, rush, rush. It ends up with shortened tempers, long lineups, and even longer bills. But how about we consider this? The mainstream media is likely wanting you to consider the vaccine status of your loved ones and any visitors to your house. But let's look at this. Let's consider the notion of tolerance and grace. Let's look at this season to be what it's supposed to be. That love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Let's exercise those things. Let's take a deep breath. When we start to feel overwhelmed, take a deep breath. Take 2, take 3, and remember what the season is all about, okay? Now, please do me a favor. Wherever you are, be a leader. Be a safety influencer. Take that time to plan ahead for that road trip. Take that time to plan ahead for what you're going to do, because we're also heading into that harsh winters and the season where things are slippery. So be a safety influencer. Be a leader. Be that one that scrapes off their windshield. Be that one that takes and makes sure that everything's working on their vehicle before you go driving, and take that extra 10 minutes to get where you're going. Be a safety influencer. Okay, until we see each other again, take care. Bye for now.